Welcome back to another edition of the Magic Latest Podcast, the podcast where we discuss everything Orlando Magic basketball. I'm your host, Jalon Dixon, and today we got a couple of things to get into. But before we get started, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notification bell so you always know we're dropping new videos. Hit that hype button on YouTube so we can continue to grow in the algorithm. Shout out to those who are already subscribed. Let's go to get right into today's episode. Starting off with Bleacher Report's better or worse article that they wrote about all 30 NBA teams, essentially answering the question, will they be better or worse than they were last season? For the Orlando Magic, they are projected to be better. With the notable addition of Nikola Vucevic and the notable subtraction of Mo Wagner, they say this is the toughest NBA team to make a prediction for. The Orlando Magic haven't done enough this offseason to make us believe they'll win more than 45 games, yet this core is still on the younger side and should technically be better because of the internal growth and continuity. The deciding factor here was Franz Wagner, who was limited to just 34 games a season ago due to injury. The core four of Wagner, Paulo Banchero, Desmond Bain, and Jalen Suggs was successful in their limited time together, registering a net rating of plus 12.2 in 438 possessions. If Wagner plays 60 games or more, Orlando should, barely, pass their 45 win mark of a season ago. Now, if you guys also remember, this same Bleacher Report set of articles when they did over unders reflected that the Orlando Magic would be around a 43 and a half win team. So projected around 43 to 44, give or take one or two. So about where they were last season at 45. They're saying with a little bit of internal improvement paired with, of course, some improved health conditions, excuse me, it would put them in the position to possibly pass that 45 win threshold. Again, maybe by only a little bit. Maybe they're a 47 win team or a 48 win team this upcoming season instead. But I think that if you can have an improved win total with a new head coach, a second season with Desmond Bain on your roster, but now trying to integrate him with a fully healthy starting five with Franz Wagner hopefully having a more sustainable year over the course of next season. And most importantly, in an improved Eastern Conference, top to bottom, in my personal opinion, I think that if you can find yourself around 45 wins again next season, if not, 45 to 47, 48 wins, as I mentioned beforehand, I think with those conditions attached, I would call that a successful regular season. Now, of course, the biggest portion of what the Orlando Magic are going to be judged off of next season is not what they do in the regular season, but what they do in the postseason. Of course, given this is a team that in the Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs era, they have they have not a single time been able to get out of the first round. That is the big bane of their existence. And I do believe that this team falls into that category of needing that big breakthrough. I feel as though the Orlando Magic, not just because of the financial implications of their roster over the coming years, but more importantly, I think they're because of the youth of their team. And I know I use the Boston Celtics as a representation or as a analogy for the Orlando Magic all the time, a comparison, if you will. But they were a team with Jason Tatum and Jalen Brown that were so young and tried so many different iterations of that squad. Remember Gordon Hayward with Kyrie Irving, Isaiah Thomas led team. They've had the Marcus Smart point guard led team. They had, of course, they eventually, they do the Drew Holiday, Derek White situation and all of that, and it's kind of putting them over the top. But that was a team that had to go through consistent trial and error. And if you even remember, let's remember the scope of that team from the perspective that they didn't win a championship under Brad Stevens in those developmental years. They didn't win a championship under Ime Udoka when they were a lot further along in their developmental process. It took until they brought in Joe Mazzulla and there was a another philosophical change for them before they finally really were able to meet that mountaintop. Now they had seen progress, right? Gotten through the first round, gotten through the second round, been an Eastern Conference Finals team, got to the NBA Finals, lost in the NBA Finals, then gets to the NBA Finals, wins in the NBA Finals. That was a team that did with very similar storylines found themselves in a situation where they had to break through the mold. And it was kind of that first, you know, those first few seasons were kind of just trying to get an understanding of what the Jason Tatum, Jalen Brown dynamic looked like. And from that standpoint, moving forward, it was just all about being able to break through certain versions of the Eastern Conference. Of course, for the longest time, one of the hardest teams to get past was that Cleveland Cavaliers team that had LeBron James on it, and they were able to kind of run the table. That Toronto Raptors team in 2019, absolute problem with Kawhi Leonard, OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Fred VanVleet, and that team that they was able to do so much work in, right? You look at the Indiana Pacers and what they were able to do over the course of the previous 2 years before last season. You look at all of these different teams that have found themselves able to be a real force in the Eastern Conference over the course of time, and the Boston Celtics consistently had to work their way through in a way that took some real time, but over time, they saw real progression. The Magic are waiting for that first real breakthrough to really start up what I think will be worth a team worth keeping together. I think that if the Orlando Magic, in my personal opinion, and I said this last episode, I think that if the Orlando Magic can break this threshold and get past the first round, not only do I think they can be a dangerous team moving beyond the first round, I think they're a team that can continue to build on it in a way that the Orlando Magic front office will be willing to bite the second apron tax in order to keep that team together. That's the biggest thing that stands out to me. I think this is an Orlando Magic team. I talk about it constantly on this podcast as much as humanly possible. This is a team that, had they got past the Detroit Pistons, I think would have had a real shot to make the Eastern Conference Finals and would have had a legitimate argument against the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals for a chance to go to the NBA Finals. I know that's a lot of what is, but this team was one victory away, one Franz Wagner injury away from taking down the number one seed in the Eastern Conference, the Detroit Pistons, in a 7 game series where they were up 3-1. There was a chance that they not only would have beat the number one seed that had 60 wins, they would have beat the number one seed with 60 wins who had two All NBA players, and they would have done it in 5 games. That was where they were. This was in a series where they were able to keep, like, that Detroit offense struggled to score. Jalen Duren was absolutely cut off water. Wendell Carter Jr. did a great job of keeping Jalen Duren under duress. Do I think that he could have then translated that into being able to compete very well in terms of holding down Evan Mobley and or Jared Allen in a series against the Cleveland Cavaliers in the next series in the second round? Yes. Yes, I do. Do I believe that, given the fact that the Orlando Magic have pushed that team to 7 games before and nearly beat them before? I know it was 2 seasons ago, but that was a team that wasn't nearly as refined as they were last year. Last year, if Franz Wagner is not injured, that team had so much more capability. It's proven by the fact that they were a 45-win team, even with Franz playing less than 35 games, playing less than 40 games. So it goes to show you and let's talk about something else. The psychological impact of a struggle season like the one they dealt with. Had they beat the Detroit Pistons, they would have been able to take the monkey off their back of being able to say they finally got past the first round. They could go into the next series motivated because they know one of their most competitive series in the Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Jalen Suggs era was that series against the Cleveland Cavaliers, where they pushed them to 7 games. And they eventually did lose, which would be the motivating factor, if not, obviously, the fact that you're in the second round of the NBA playoffs, which means you're one round away from being in the Eastern Conference Finals. Then, if you beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, which I think they were more than capable of being able to do, again, you face a New York Knicks team. That, quite frankly, You showed in the regular season with a healthy Franz Wagner you were capable of being able to compete with. Even in, if you guys remember, even in the in-season tournament, the NBA Cup game, in which the Orlando Magic were facing the New York Knicks, that was a game where Franz Wagner got injured in the game. But the Magic got out to a hot start in the game. Of course, everything kind of started to deteriorate from there. This is an Orlando Magic team, quite frankly, that I think has a lot of. I think they have a lot in front of them. I think they have a lot of in front of them. Do I have my concerns? Yes. But do I think this is a team that should truly be worried about in the Eastern Conference? Yes. Notice one of the most important things I took away from this sentence, from this entire graph from Bleacher Report, this is the toughest NBA team to make a prediction for. I believe that the Orlando Magic, to echo the words of Zach Lowe, I believe they are the biggest sleeper in the Eastern Conference because nobody knows what to do with them. Because if they're healthy, with improved three-point shooting from Nikola Vucevic, bringing back Javon Carter and having his locker room leadership for the entirety of the season as opposed to just 30 games or so of it. Seeing an improved Noah Penda in Summer League. Seeing some positive strides from Jace Richardson in Summer League. The backdrop of Anthony Black being in a contract season. The backdrop of Paulo Banchero, amongst many, Bleacher Report, we've mentioned it in a multitude of different articles. Paulo Banchero going into a prove-it season. Franz Wagner coming off of being injured last season. People are starting to kind of forget how good Franz really is. This is a team that I think is the biggest enigma, easily the biggest sleeper in the Eastern Conference, because if they are fully healthy, they are a team that I think amongst all the teams in the East has the most viability to be an Eastern Conference Finals team off of simply self-improvement alone. There's a lot of different caveats you have to throw in with some of these other teams. But the Orlando Magic fall into a category where you're not talking about continuity issues. I don't think you're talking about hierarchical issues. This is all about this team being healthy enough to sustain through an 82 game regular season and put it all together. I know the three ball sucks. They've been able to thrive around that. They also improved in spite of that last season with the addition of Desmond Bane. And I think their offense is going to improve a little bit more, hopefully with the play calling of Sean Sweeney and John Beilein and of course adding in Nikola Vucevic. I think all of these things give them the upside of a team that could be even better on offense, even if the three ball isn't consistent. This is just going to come down to having our guys on the floor. This is going to come down to us having. It's not like the Philadelphia 76ers, where even if they have positive health, there's still a continuity question because you have multiple, four players in their starting five had, I believe, 25% usage or more on their respective teams last season. Tyrese Maxey, Joel Embiid, LeBron James, and Jaylen Brown. I believe all of them had at least 20 to 21% usage, overall player usage, on their respective teams last season. And they're now all going to have to share the basketball as one single starting five. So there's still a continuity question even then. This is a team that is already proven. Let me read the stat to you again. With that core four, and that probably can include Wendell Carter Jr. rounding out that five-man group, registering a net rating of plus 12.2 in 438 possessions. That is a team that is 12 points better when they have all their guys firing on all cylinders. Just something to take into consideration. Next up, Sticking with Bleacher Report, they recently did a way too early mock draft, and the Orlando Magic are slotted at the 15th spot. Who they take at the 15th spot? Jason Crow Jr. out of Missouri. Combo guard, 6'4", 190 pounds, 18-year-old comes in, says there's likely to be a lot of conversation around Jason Crow Jr.'s but potent shot making, scoring confidence, thin frame, limited explosion, and projected archetype at the NBA level. His expertise in self creation, shooting with NBA range, hitting contested pull ups, and converting touch shots is evident. The scouting microscope will be on how often he gets to the rim, whether he can generate high percentage finishes, and if he shows enough playmaking for NBA teams to picture a lead guard. I'm a little concerned about this way too early projection because it doesn't really scream what the Orlando Magic really need out of a combo guard. In my personal opinion, at the combo guard position, I think you need one of two things for where this current Orlando Magic roster is, and I'm assuming that Jalen Suggs is still on the roster with an acquisition like this one in mind. I think you need either a get a bucket combo guard who has the ability to be on ball enough to be considered a point guard as far as decision making, but can also be just as dangerous as an off ball threat scorer that you can utilize him as a secondary guard, secondary initiator. One of the things that really hurt me in this way too early draft is the Orlando Magic's projection going with a player like Jason Crow. No disrespect to Crow, but in relation to, as opposed to, excuse me, a player like Elijah Arenas, somebody that I spoke about a lot last season during the NBA draft cycle, who I thought would be a really good fit for the Orlando Magic. He is projected to go to the Charlotte Hornets at number 22. Now, we're not going to focus on how he projects to the Charlotte Hornets. I want you to listen to what his projection is as a player at the next level. First off, standing at the shooting guard position at 6'6". First off, that just screams at 6'6", almost 200 pounds, as opposed to 6'4", 180 pounds. Elijah Arenas is built more like the type of shooting guard that the Orlando Magic would draft, based off the fact that the Orlando Magic have a history of going with bigger ball handlers, right? So let's start there. Then let's advance to what Bleacher Report's breakdown actually says. Elijah Arenas Elijah Arenas' advanced ball handling, shot creation, and shot making skill was very evident during his freshman year. Given his late start and injuries, scouts have sounded willing to give him a pass for the 21.3% percent 3-point shooting, 40.5% 2-point shooting, and 32 turnovers to 23 assists. The bar is higher now. Better decision making and more second year feel should lead to sharper execution on drives and jumpers. And based on his size, movement, and repertoire and genes, it will become easy for scouts to picture an NBA level scorer if he starts converting more consistently. Think about all the players that we've discussed on this podcast that you guys have thrown out in the comment section as potential targets for the Orlando Magic to help flesh out this bench and give us a microwave scorer, on ball juice kind of player to play backup point guard slash backup shooting guard. In a lot of ways, I think that Elijah Arenas could be more of a definitive shooting guard, especially if he gets to play next to someone like Anthony Black, for example, who can take a little bit more of the defensive assignment, can play more of the lead point guard position, and play in that regard where those two can balance off of one another. Also, there's a lot of athleticism in that backcourt as well if you were to pair those two together. We talked about guys like Malik Monk. We've talked about guys like Russell Westbrook. We've brought up, the archetype of what Victor Oladipo is. We've talked about Bradley Beal. We've talked about a bunch of different players who kind of meet this archetype of like, go get a bucket scorer, can do it in a lot of different ways. Advanced ball handling and shot creation ability just makes him a dangerous threat as an around the rim player in the mid range, Elijah Arenas to me is a true 3 level to 4 level scorer. I don't know if he's a 5 level scorer yet. I'm a little worried about where he fits as a 3 point shooter. Last season, of course, that 21.3% does not scream well. The Orlando Magic have never been an elite 3 pointing team as a collective, so that doesn't necessarily scare me off from him. But 6'6", nearly 200 pounds, probably could put on a little bit more weight in his frame, quite frankly. With the kind of ball skill and on ball creation ability that he has, would be a little bit more of a sure thing to me for what the Orlando Magic need in a secondary playmaker or tertiary playmaker in any given lineup, as opposed to Jason Crow, who does kind of scream, you know, big time shot creator, but does it with a little smaller frame, a little less consistency as far as being able to get to the rim. The lack of athleticism and athletic explosion from him creates a little bit of a worry. If I kind of wanted a semi athletic to under athletic guard that could create off the dribble, wouldn't we just invest a lot more in Jace Richardson, who is a little bit better than an average athlete while also having some significant on ball juice? The only difference between Jace Richardson and Jason Crow, based on my understanding, is that one is 6'1" and one is 6'4". But as far as thin frame, uh, I wouldn't say limited explosion from Jace Richardson, but I think he's like an above average athlete at best from an NBA perspective. Self creation, I think there's something there. Shooting, I believe, as far as that range, Jace Richardson translates. But getting to the rim has not been an elite skill for Jace Richardson. High percentage in the paint finishes has not necessarily been the calling card of Jace Richardson, even dating back to Michigan State. So why draft a player like Jason Crow Jr. to essentially play a similar archetypal role to Jace Richardson, who's already in our system, versus getting someone like Elijah Arenas, bigger guard, I think could positionally scale a little bit better, where if we wanted to play a 3 guard lineup, he fits a bit better. Imagine a full athletic guard run of having Anthony Black, Elijah Arenas, and Jamal Cain all next to one another. Right? That's something that could give a lot of pop to a second unit. And then you have Jamal Cain as more of your slashing archetype, your Lonnie Walker type of archetype. You have Anthony Black, who I think is your utility Swiss Army knife player at the point guard position, and then you have Elijah Arenas, who's your go get a bucket by any means 2 guard. Just fits a lot more to me. Now, I am personally a big fan of Elijah Arenas, and I did cover the USC Trojans a lot last season, so there is a certain level of attachment that I have to him as a player. But I'm looking at this way too early, and I'm saying to myself, it feels like if Elijah's gonna drop, and maybe this is just based off of the fact that again he played in limited minutes, and I mean he literally missed almost the entirety of the first, not excuse me, he missed all of the entirety of the first half of the season and basically didn't play until a game or two into Big Ten play last season. So this is a guy who did not get to show off too much last season, and by the time he did finally get on the floor, USC, if they weren't already deteriorated at the guard position, they were completely falling apart by the time he started to even remotely hit his stride last year. But if he's going to be projected to be the 22nd pick in the draft and you have a chance to just go ahead and steal him up at 15, I think he just fits a lot more. And you look at some of these other names that come off, I think that, I mean, we'll see where things go. But I think that he's a player that you could take a real swing on, and he fits more of that archetype that they so desperately need, the Orlando Magic so desperately need at the 2 guard position. Next up, let's talk about the Orlando Magic schedule. Shout out to the Full Court Magic podcast. They recently listed their 3 most important games to watch for the Orlando Magic next season, listing that the October 25th matchup against the New York Knicks because it's a matchup against the defending champions, and they are the ones who knocked off the Magic in the NBA Cup semifinals. So it would be good for the Magic if they could go in there and spoil the fun for the Knicks. Excuse me. Another one he says, of course, he also does reference that Sean Sweeney can get some get back given the fact that he was on that San Antonio Spurs team that lost in the finals. The next one that he mentions is the Orlando Magic going on the Orlando Magic game early in the season where they host the Philadelphia 76ers, of course, Philly with the newly added LeBron James and Jalen Brown. Of course, they also retooled by bringing in KCP, bringing in Dean Wade, Anthony Simons, drafting LeBaron Philon. So interesting squad to have to deal with, and of course, more importantly, right now people are picking them to be the favorites to come out of the Eastern Conference. So another legitimate litmus test. And then the final game they mentioned is the Detroit Pistons. And of course, the Detroit Pistons are in the same group of the NBA Cup for the Orlando Magic. The Orlando Magic were 4-0 in the cup, so it'll be interesting to see if against the team that they did lose to in the first round, if there's a chance that they could, get some get back there. I'm going to share my three, and I'm going to do this in a way that I don't pick the same games that they did on the Full Court Magic podcast because, want to create a little bit of variety here. So the ones that I am going to list are number one. The number one game I am paying attention to is actually a game very late in the season. It is on the road March 10th against the Miami Heat on ESPN. This game is going to be important because this is a game that first of all, it's one of their only two ESPN games this season. Talking about the Orlando Magic, of course, not Miami. Miami is going to see a lot more screen time because they added a star this summer, so that by proxy tends to add that to the mix. But that Miami game is also the start of a 5-game road trip starting with Miami, then at Atlanta, at Chicago, at Milwaukee, and at Boston. That's going to be a huge stretch in the latter portion of the season. Huge stretch in the latter portion of the season. And on the road at Miami, on national television, your first and one of only two ESPN games this season against Giannis, against Bam, against this Miami team that you swept last season in the regular season. This to me is going to be a big one because it's another real contender in the Eastern Conference. Again, it's the first ESPN of only two ESPN games the Orlando Magic have next season. And it is the first game, a tone-setting game, for what I believe will be a very important 5-game road stretch for the Orlando Magic in the latter portion of the season. So that, I believe, is the most important game of the season. Another game that I think qualifies here if I have to go with one that I think really stands out, I would say let's go back to the early portion of the season. I think that the first matchup against where is the so here's something that stands out to me. You go down the list of potential contending teams in the Eastern Conference. The team that stands out to me in particular is the Cleveland Cavaliers. A team that is, literally throwing every dart they have left in the chamber. They fired every bullet they got, and now they're going for broke, trying to see if they can get James Harden back, along with maybe signing trading for Peyton Watson and potentially still bringing in Jonathan Kuminga. This team's going for broke. The Orlando Magic do not face the Cleveland Cavaliers until December 16th. So this is a team that should be a legitimate factor in the Eastern Conference, and you're not going to see them for the first time until 2 months into the regular season. I think that's something that I'm definitely logging because I think it's pretty important given the fact that I that's a team that I could realistically seeing as a potential first round matchup for the Orlando Magic in some kind of, 4 or 5 game. I could see it. So I'm gonna list them as another team, another game that I think really stands out. December 16th is when they face them the first time. They only faced the Cleveland Cavaliers 3 times on this entire season. The next time after that is January 7th, then February 6th. They're done with Cleveland. So they're not going to see Cleveland very often. And the first time they see them isn't even until 2.5 months into the season, into the regular season itself, or nearly 2.5 months into the regular season itself. So a team that I'm keeping my eye on kind of in my peripheral that, I'm going to kind of take note of these Cleveland Cavaliers matchups because I think this is a team I could legitimately see being like in that 4 or 5 seed range around where Orlando I think has the chance to be next season. And they're going to get a very limited sample size of them. But I think that it's going to be important that they take advantage of said sample size. And last but not least, I think another game or a set of games that I think is most important, but I'm going to say game in general. Let's start early. They mentioned that New York Knicks game on October 25th. What about these back-to-back on the road games against the Toronto Raptors, who may likely have Kawhi Leonard on the roster? Another team that looks like they could be a real factor in the Eastern Conference next season with Emmanuel Quickly, RJ Barrett, Kawhi Leonard, Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, Jacoby Walter, right? You go down that list, Jamal Shead, keep going down, right? This is a team that also could be a real threat to make a big trade at some point down the course of the regular season. Probably won't happen before this October 28 game. Shout out to them. They're playing at Toronto on my birthday, so that's kind of dope. But nonetheless, that is a team that I also think needs to really be factored in. The same way I think that there's a real chance for Cleveland to be a first round matchup. I think Toronto equally could be a first round matchup. Now, for when I say that, there's certain teams in the Eastern Conference that you just project to possibly be, regular season demons. Like I think Detroit is going to be a regular season demon. I think they have a chance to be like a top 3 seed. I think that you look at a team like New York, I think that they have a chance to maybe be like a regular season demon just because they play so hard, their starters play a lot of minutes, so on and so forth. I think that I think Cleveland could be in that category because they tend to run the table during the regular season. It's when they get to the postseason that things get a little tricky. But your Miami's, shoot, Indiana, I think is going to be a really good regular season team this year. Quite frankly, if Tyrese Halliburton can get back to his fringe MVP caliber kind of player that he was 2 seasons ago, back when of course he was leading his team to the NBA Finals. So when I mention these like first round matchups as far as being like very likely, I'm mentioning it within the context that I think that like the Magic are going to be somewhere between the 4 or 5 seed, and I'm thinking of teams that are like gonna take the regular season seriously, but maybe not good enough to be like top 3 in the East. Right? Like I think that Miami is like probably somewhere between 5 and 7. Not gonna lie to you. Because they're just not that deep. They're just not that deep right now. And with Bradley Beal going back to the Los Angeles Clippers, DeMar DeRozan's name still being thrown out for teams like the Denver Nuggets, for example. They're a team that doesn't look like they're getting any deeper anytime soon. And with the Mavericks playing hardball with Klay Thompson, where they're only going to move him via trade, I don't know how much better that that Miami Heat roster is going to get, for example. Charlotte, I think, is still a little ways away. Atlanta could be a regular season demon. They could be a regular season demon. But they've also shown us last season they're a team that tends to start a little slow and then kind of find their fire. Maybe they just kind of pick up where they left off as far as the regular season last season and kind of roll. We'll see. But yeah, I would say those are the three games that really stand out to me. So again, if I had to rank them, number one, most important game in my personal opinion of the entire season may be that on the road Miami game in March on ESPN, first ESPN of game of two in the regular season. Again, on the road at Miami, first road game of five straight in an Eastern Conference run. And by the way, these games are very close together. March 10th, March 13th, March 15th, then the 16th, then the 18th. There's going to be a lot of games in a short period of time. That Miami game under those bright lights is going to set the tone for what I think the rest of that run is going to be. And that's one, two, let's say out of the five teams in there, there are three teams that I think we all can definitively say should be in the postseason conversation next year. Miami, Atlanta, and Boston. Now, Chicago and Milwaukee, probably on the outside looking in. We'll see. Probably on the outside looking in. But those other three teams in Miami, Atlanta, and Boston, I think are teams that people are pretty much expecting to be featured somewhere in the postseason. It's just going to be all about where seeding is. And then, as I mentioned beforehand, I think that Cleveland Cavaliers matchup on December 16th, first time they're seeing Cleveland, only going to see Cleveland three times this upcoming season. A team that I think could really, you know, look, they don't have any more bullets to fire. If they can get Peyton Watson, if they can add Jonathan Kuminga, get James Harden back on a friendly deal, like that's a team. That's a team that is better if they can add Peyton Watson and Jonathan Kuminga along with getting James Harden back. And even if they just get Peyton Watson, that does solve their three problem in a way that they've struggled with in a multitude of different ways over the course of the last few years. Whether it was Karis LeVert, DeAndre Hunter, Max Strus, no matter who it was they tried to play at three, it never truly satisfied the role they needed from that small forward position. Peyton Watson could be that guy for them. So that's a team that, especially if they're able to add Peyton Watson, we'll see if they actually achieve that, but especially if they're able to add Peyton Watson, or even Jonathan Kuminga at that three-man position, it could make them a very valuable team. And only being able to get a small sample size of them does create a little bit of friction where I think it could be interesting to see kind of to see what they own. Kind of to see what they own. And then again, I go back to the Toronto Raptors, those two early matchups, back-to-back on the road games, part of a three-game road stint, starting with that October 25th game against New York, and then going into Nova Scotia, and then going into the, going into the Toronto Stadium as well. I forget what it's called. He's in Toronto Raptors Stadium. Scotiabank. Jesus, I said Nova Scotia. Anyway, I think I know what I was thinking of, but anyway, nonetheless. So those would be mine if I had to go a different way from the Full Court Magic podcast. And shout out to those guys, by the way, who do great content over there. Last but not least, wanted to end the podcast off on an interesting question. Of course, I am looking to finish off the Magic versus series. We will be finishing off the Magic versus series very soon. I've just been trying to hit some interesting plot points as we get into the dog days of the NBA offseason. There's still been some, interesting articles dropped, like the Bleacher Report ones and things of that nature that have made it pretty cool to still be able to follow the Magic. And I didn't want these articles to get old and then try to touch on them later on. So I've been trying to hit them as we go along. But of course, we're going to finish the Magic versus series because we still have, I believe, 5 teams left in the series before we're fully finished. But my question is, what do you guys want to see kind of to close out the dog days portion of the off season? If I have to check NBA training camp dates. So essentially, NBA training camp doesn't officially start until nearly the end of September, September 29th. We are at mid-August. The goal is to be finished the Magic versus series by the end of next week. That would probably like kind of segue us into the start of September, but we got to get through all of September before training camp. So, what are you guys interested in discussing? I have an idea for like a 21 question series that I'm kind of still experimenting with, like how to go about how about functionally, doing that. But what's some stuff that you guys would be interested in discussing? What are some things that you would want me to kind of like delve into, or things of that nature, as far as being able to kind of like cover this next like month essentially of Orlando Magic discussions before we get to training camp? Because once training camp starts, we can start talking training camp battles and so on and so forth. It kind of writes itself once training camps. The NBA season, as far as covering it as a podcaster, tends to really write itself once the season starts because everything is happening. But during this stretch of the NBA offseason when nothing is really going on, especially for a Magic team that's not really in the mix for any free agents or anything like that, this September is probably where the hardest stretch for covering any team in the league gets. So I would like to kind of gauge the comment section and get an idea from you guys of what you would be interested in discussing over the course of September. But with all that being said, it's been another edition of the Magic Ladies Podcast. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that post notification bell so you always know we're dropping new videos. Again, hit that hype button on YouTube so we can continue to grow in the algorithm. I'll see you guys next time.